Welcome to the Bonsai Builders podcast. I'm your host, Addison Galambos. Today we'll be diving into a fascinating topic, the bonsai body. And no, I don't mean the trunk. I mean the actual body of the practitioner. Bonsai is a long-term pursuit, and today we'll be delving into how do we make sure that we're able to do bonsai sustainably for a lifetime. So I'm super excited to have our special guest today. Justin, would you like to start by introducing yourself? And I'd love for you to give folks some background on both you from a bonsai standpoint, so maybe some of your goals and where you're at in the hobby, and then also from a professional standpoint, because I think your expertise and knowledge is obviously very, very relevant to this topic.
I'm a physical therapist by training. I actually specialize in helping people with vertigo and concussion. It's a very super specialized field, but prior to that, I was more into the orthopedic realm. So your aches and pains, shoulder, back, elbow, you name it. But I had the opportunity to specialize, so I went to that. I also run a small business where I get to do strength and wellness coaching. So I get to have a good selection of cases and different people I work with, and hopefully I'm helpful to most of them. From a personal standpoint, I'm just a person that's always really interested in learning. I spend a lot of time trying to understand human behavior, decision making, and why we do things. And I think that just kind of gets me more into the psychology of how things work. So that's just one of my personal things I like to do. And then from a bonsai standpoint, I've been seriously doing it for the last 3 to 4 years. I think I came across bonsai back in like 2016, 2017, and I was like, oh, maybe that's something that I could really get into. But it wasn't until I took a class or experience with, you might be familiar with Tony Relo. He's up here in Seattle. His Instagram is at Tony Bonsaico. So for those who are familiar with him, he's been an integral part in helping me get into bonsai and just getting the reps that I can't do on my little balcony on his wonderful collection. So shout out to Tony for getting me into this and getting to a point where I can connect with Addison, who wants to do an interview with me. So yeah, I'm happy to be here, and thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, definitely. Now, you mentioned, I think you're a doctorate in physical therapy. Anybody who's gone to that level of commitment and education, like it's such a massive sacrifice. And the listeners and I are very appreciative of you taking your time to chat with us about this. So really appreciate that. I'm curious on your bonsai goal journey. One thing you said was it's a struggle doing bonsai on a deck, and I have the same challenge out here as well. Very limited space, and getting the reps in is difficult. So it's really helpful to have. We talked about that actually in the first episode of the podcast, where it's tough to get reps, and so you have to find a way to do that. But I'm curious, do you have any specific goals in bonsai?
I mean, for the most part, just like any hobbyist, is just to find ways to be able to learn the art, learn the craft. Yes, I do plan on getting a yard eventually, but the balcony actually has its pluses because it teaches you how conservative you need to be and how extra, I don't know, you have to pay a lot of attention to your trees and what they're telling you. So I appreciate that. No, I can't make, or I've learned that I can't make the major cuts or major pruning or major bends at certain times of the year, especially because you can't save them. So the restrictions from the balcony has been amazing, but the goal is eventually just to have my own collection. I think that's the ultimate goal. No, nothing beyond that, really.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm really excited that you have both this expertise from your profession and education on the physical side, but you really understand bonsai as well, right? Having been taking care of bonsai yourself, right? So I think you'll have very unique insight on this kind of topic. So have you ever consulted on any bonsai related injuries? Maybe not a ton of concussions in bonsai, but...
Well, let's hope not. For the most part, I would say within our club here, like the Puget Sound Bonsai Association, I've been approached by a couple of the members about their aches and pains. So I do get familiar with some of the common injuries that can happen there. But for the most part, I would say just kind of talking about bonsai in general, it has the mix of hard labor, like more gross motor movement, I like to categorize it, and a lot of fine motor movement that kind of requires like meticulous control of your hands. So a lot of these people within the club are telling me about like their knee pains or in back pains. That's kind of the gross motor motion that you might find. But also at the same time, people have reached out to me for their wrists and elbow pains. So I haven't consulted anyone specifically for like, in the clinic type of thing, but I've come up with a list of things that I just like to share with people. And it seems to be helpful whenever they do try it.
So, yeah, I'm sure we'll get into that and that'll be really helpful. On the surface, at least, bonsai appears to be fairly low demand from a physical standpoint. You don't have to be a D1 athlete or have a 7 foot wingspan to be at the peak of bonsai
Yep.
necessarily, right? In terms of being an artist, I guess. So I'm curious from your perspective, though, are there kind of hidden physical demands or risks that some of us might not be aware of?
I mean, it just kind of comes from what perspective you're coming from, right? I do think that bonsai can be a very physical thing. When I'm training my athletes or even just like training my general population individuals, there's a lot of gross motor movements, such as whole body movements that I'm trying to train them. And these are pretty much your everyday bonsai activities. It's bending forward, squatting, lunging. It's a lot of pushing. It's a lot of carrying heavy things and pulling. This doesn't even go to collecting yamadori, but that takes it to a whole nother level where you need to be able to hike, climb, somehow collect it out of the dirt, and then carry it all the way down. I mean, you've met Randy, and he's definitely strong enough to be able to do some of these massive yamadori collections that it's a little bit more than you would think for a craft or a hobby that you're doing. So believe it or not, I do think that a lot of people could benefit from, I guess, a certain level of fitness to kind of help them out with the hobby.
That makes sense. So to summarize the kind of gross and fine motor control,
Yep.
I think that distinction is really important for folks to understand. So there's like a class of activities in bonsai which are like, hey, you lift your tree, or I
Mhm.
mean, collecting. There's a whole bunch of like maybe you have the tree on your back carrying it out, or
Yep.
you're swinging in a pickaxe or something like that. So those are kind of like those gross
Yep.
motor actions, and
Yep.
then oh, you're on a shohin black pine and you're plucking needles, or you're threading 18 gauge wire through a
Yep.
branch. Those are more of like the fine motor control actions. So it seems like bonsai has a mix of both of those.
Exactly. I think there's a few crafts out there that people can have that combination, but I think bonsai is a nice marriage between the two, where it gives you access to many different types of parts of the craft that you can really get into, say shohin, and yeah, you don't really need to be lifting a 15-pound pot or 20-pound pot or even heavier than that, or you don't need a specific lift to pick a pot to transfer around your garden. You just can collect things off the different shelves you have. So yeah, and it just gives people the opportunity to see what they're capable of and then find ways to kind of engage in the hobby in a way that maybe other people would use differently.
That makes sense. And I guess especially as you get a larger collection, both in terms of tree size as well as number of trees,
Yep.
like those physical, like gross motor movement demands just increase, right? It becomes like essentially like a physical labor job as a professional when you have
Yep.
hundreds of trees maybe that you're moving or bringing in and out of the shop and things like that.
You had a chance to visit Mariah recently, and those trees are very few of them are one person carries. And then again, that's what Ryan's prerogative is, and he's the type of garden he's creating. I'll say for my personal collection, I think if I can't carry it, it's maybe a little bit too big for what I want. So again, it comes down to your preferences, and again, people are coming in at different ages to into the hobby, so you don't necessarily have to have like again like all this like strength to kind of carry things. You can find things that
Yeah, it seems like you can adjust your collection to meet your kind of physical needs to some extent,
yep.
but that might be a very real consideration. Like if you want to have large trees, you might actually have to build your general physical fitness to be able to do bonsai the way you want to, right? Which is very
Certainly,
interesting.
unless you have help, right?
Yeah,
If you have
yeah,
someone that can help you, two-person carry. Again, being at Tony's garden, there's plenty of two-person carries. I don't know how he moves some of the things by himself at times, but he finds a way. But it's impressive, and it's yeah, as long as you have the right things in mind. This makes me think about just ergonomics and how people can use their body as best as possible when working with those trees. My question for you is like, you've had an opportunity to like learn from Ryan and Todd and other classes. Have you figured out like how they teach a certain way and how they move their bodies to make it so you can do things better?
yeah. That's a good question. I mean, I've had wrist pain in the past, so
Yep.
like related to bonsai. And so that's something that I try to go in, and like in my last class with Ryan, I asked him to focus a lot on ergonomics around big bends, for example, right? Like whenever you're applying a lot of pressure on your wrist as you're trying to bend a branch, and that requires a lot of force in a very small area.
Yep.
I know I'm not a physical therapist, but my understanding is that like the wrist isn't exactly an area that is meant to have a ton of force applied to it, right? But I'd say in general, there's probably a lack or like a dearth of that type of training
Mhm.
in general in bonsai. Folks often teach ways to move trees more ergonomically. So like at Andrew Robson's garden, for example, he's very clear about, oh, we want to bring the cart up to the, he has lots of like tons of massive trees. So bring the cart that we're going to use to move the tree up to the bench, get it to the exact level of the bench, and then slide the tree onto the bench, right? So like really
Yep.
minimal like lifting and moving. So
Yep.
that's something that I think is taught very well, but I think the
Mhm.
ergonomics of I don't think people maybe, or I haven't felt in classes that folks address the issue of like, hey, you're sitting in one spot for long periods of time. And then two, I don't know that I've learned at least all the details or gotten the right guidance around making sure that you're wiring in a way that's going to be sustainable long term.
Just even on that point, bonsai has a very unique task because you have to be in these awkward postures for prolonged periods of time. Sure, we know what good posture looks like, but it's really difficult to get into certain angles on the tree to be able to say wire something and sustain good posture. So, well, what is it? Am I going to hurt myself by having bad posture, or what are we doing to kind of make the most ergonomic changes? And even to your point, the height of your workstation makes a huge difference. Where you position yourself. I've had the pleasure of like working or learning from Michael Hagedorn, and he talks a lot about positioning, how you position your body to be most successful. And I think when I watch a lot of the Mirai live videos, Ryan does a lot of these little tidbits where he says, okay, if you can maneuver the wire this way, this is how you can essentially make yourself more efficient and reduce like your chance of hurting yourself. You're able to use more joints of your body at once versus just like you said, the wrist being like the weak point for many people. I can turn my body this way and it makes a big difference. So those are really good points. And I'm like you said, I don't think it's emphasized enough, but it's because the hobby itself, it's gaining popularity and classes are changing. I don't know. It's
Yeah.
interesting
Yeah.
thing to see.
And it's probably not something taught. Well, I'm curious whether it's taught in Japan or not, right? I'm very curious about it. Seems like they do a lot of things in their apprenticeships that are like really working themselves to the bone. And so I'm curious whether that's a big focus within Japanese culture. Since like a lot of the people who are teaching here in the US have been trained or gone through someone who's trained in the Japanese style. I'm curious if that's focused on. I don't know the answer to that, but
I mean, my guess, right? Again, I have no context of it either. Is it's more of a survival of the fittest. And if you have someone who takes the time to make the meaningful reps, but also work on self-preservation, they're able to kind of find their way. So again, that's when I'm watching Michael do something, or I'm watching Ryan on Ryan Live doing something. It's just like they have had so many repetitions and maybe mistakes that they learn, like, ooh, don't do that because you're gonna fry your finger or your thumb, right? And then they found ways through meaningful repetitions to change that. But without a doubt, in those likely more intensive apprenticeships, people are burning out and they have to kind of step up because of the pain or the injuries that they acquire. So I think that's
yeah.
it's an interesting thing to think about.
We've already kind of started talking about it, but what do you think people can do to prolong their bonsai careers
Yeah,
from a preventative standpoint? We were already kind of talking a little bit about ergonomics, so that might be a good place to start, both
yeah,
in terms of like workstation and in terms of like actually doing work.
right. The way I like to explain it to most of my patients and most of my clients is just understanding this first principle. Think of it's a relationship between capacity and load. So it's overly simple. And once I kind of lay it out, it makes a lot of sense, right? So say you have a teeter totter. You have on the right side, right? You have one unit that describes the load, how heavy the object is, what's the amount of effort that requires to pick that up. That's the load. And then on the other side, you have capacity, which is your personal capacity using best ergonomics or using whatever muscles to kind of help lift things. That's your ability to lift up that load. Most of the time, injuries, or you're at the highest risk of injury when your capacity is smaller than what you're trying to pick up, right? I think that's pretty straightforward. And the thing is that if you're able to find, again, like best position, best table height, best help in the garden to lift and move things, then you're able to kind of increase your total capacity to move those particular loads. What happens with people most often is that when they sustain an injury, the load is too big for the capacity, or say like the cumulative load, the repetitiveness, the hours spent in a certain position, then your wrist starts to hurt, your forearm starts to hurt, your thumb starts to hurt. What do? They end up resting, and they end up resting like, I'm just going to take it easy for the next couple of weeks. What happens during that time is that your capacity continues to shrink because you're not using those muscles, you're not activating those joints. Those are different things where you're like losing the capacity. And then after those couple of weeks, you're out of pain and you're like, okay, I'm ready to go back into it. And they're jumping to the same type of load with a smaller capacity. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, so you're saying somebody can have an injury and then in the process of waiting for that injury to heal, actually continue to weaken and then jump back into the like think everything's 100% fine and they're at the same level they were at, but then actually not take into consideration that
Look, it's super frustrating. And then it creates a cycle where you're like, I just can't do this anymore, or I need to change my technique completely, which technically might not be a bad thing. But you don't realize that there's like that window of opportunity to build up the capacity before you just kind of jump back into it. Or if you're jumping back into, say, wiring, you don't jump straight to the 4 gauge. I mean, you might need to, but that's a lot of demand, lots of load that you're asking your body for or your different joints for, and it's just probably not ready for it. So when I'm thinking about preventative thoughts, it's just like if you're able to see the bigger picture like that, then you're able to organize, okay, what can I do in this moment? I'm not going to stop everything, but how can I build myself back up? And then that's where you start to integrate, okay, like for you had your wrist pain. You realize, okay, this is like, I want to do this for a longer period of time. I'm still relatively young and I'm still starting to have this pain. That's concerning. So what can I do to learn, okay, hey, Ryan, I want you to help me focus on how to use my body better. I think that's the best way to kind of reflect on the situation and build better technique. And then on the other side of it, you can supplement that with some kind of training, some kind of, I'm not asking you to go to the gym, but it's like find different ways that you can strengthen up those joints and ligaments and muscles so it can tolerate those activities. So that makes sense.
That makes a lot of sense. So you're almost saying if you have pain, it's not necessarily a death knell for you in the hobby. It's more you might need to do things proactively, like strengthen yourself or like focus or change your capacity to work in that way via, ergonomic type setup things, right? So it's almost like pain isn't necessarily an issue if you are then like responding to that pain.
Yeah, it's the toughest thing to teach most people is that pain is supposed to be a protector. It's like a signaling sign. It tells you like, hey, this might not be a good idea. We don't have the capacity for it, or hey, you broke your leg. Like, don't put weight on it. We're gonna let you know that you should protect yourself here. But it's when people don't interpret that signal well, it's that's where it kind of leads us to different.
Makes sense. So I guess for the bonsai setup, like are there kind of tips or advice that you have around your experience around things that have been like the highest risk type activities that people can focus on? Obviously, we can't outline every risk, but I'm curious if there's any like hot topic issues that you've seen that people might want to think about before they get injured or like try to strengthen proactively.
Right. So the thing is that it depends on what level you're at, right? To carry heavier things, you use the equipment to help you out. To work on your trees, my balcony has no space, so I don't have a turntable that goes up and down. I have to jerry rig whatever table that I have to make it work. And yes, my back aches a little bit more just because I have to be in these weird hunched over positions. Ideally, you find a way to kind of have the equipment that makes you successful. So for example, if you have enough space, a garage or a workspace, then you're definitely having the turntables that can go up and down so you can adjust the height to where you're working, where you're not just hunched over all the time. I mean, silly things like watering depends on how big your garden is. And this is just because having to water Tony's garden. He trusts me with that, which I'm very thankful for. But, I'm using like one of his other, nozzles for watering. And I'm doing this for like 30 to an hour, and I'm like, man, my wrist is starting to hurt. And it's like, why is this happening? This is like, this shouldn't be something that's hurting. I'm just watering plants. But it's makes all the difference because you're kind of squeezing the whole time, right? And you're having this kind of pinch grip that does make that kind of wrist hurt. So even like when he's like, oh yeah, like you should use this wand. I'm like, oh, you should have told me that this was here the whole time. So you have the longer wand and you're not really pressing anything down. You're like, oh, this makes all the difference in terms of how you can preserve your joints or make them like less achy. It's tough to say because you have to buy stuff to kind of make things more ergonomically helpful. But if you plan on doing this seriously and doing this for a long period of time, those are just well worth the investments. And it's not just like, oh, that's just a marketing scheme. There's certain levels of physicality that needs to be mitigated by some of these ergonomic tools. If you're just talking about your body positioning, again, I've alluded to it before, you using more joints, as many parts of your body as possible to make the maneuvers, to make the different pushes, pulls, the wiring, it helps out the most. If you are anchoring yourself in a way where you are getting more proximal joints, so proximal meaning by closest to the body to be engaging with the activity, the better success you're going to have. When you're working with more of the distal joints, right, the fingertips, the wrists, that's when you're starting to like really stress out ligaments and tissues that are just not designed to do that much work, to do that much activity. And ironically or unironically, those are the places that where we all develop arthritis the fastest and most commonly.
I have a few questions based on what you went through. Maybe I'll start with, so I think your point around you need to buy things to some extent to solve these ergonomic hurdles is a good one. Maybe it's just very simple, but what is the signal that you might need to, is pain a signal that you might need to look into changing an like the ergonomics of a situation, or like buying something, or what's the trigger for you when you're like, oh, now I know I need to make a change or like look for something
Honestly,
to solve
it's
this
tough
problem?
because everyone is at different points in their life and how ready they are to dive into something. And then, like for example, for me, like my balcony, I quite frankly can't make it happen. So I will thankfully be able to. I'm young enough to tolerate the stresses of it happening. I can limit my time out there. It's frustrating sometimes, but I just have to be mindful of that. But for the most part, I mean, waiting for pain to be the signal is probably not the best. It's a way to do it, but I wouldn't recommend it. I think it's just more comes down to whether or not you make that decision that this is something that you really want to spend a lot of time on. I think that's what it comes down to.
That makes
A lot of
sense. Like
people will,
there's a sacrifice versus
yeah,
your willingness to commit, kind of.
you're like, oh wow, this is not a phase. And I always tell myself this. I think, who was I talking to? I think I was talking to Aaron from the you know, collection down south in Federal Way, Pacific Bonsai Museum, and I was like maybe 2 years into it. I was talking with him at the PBE, the first one, and he's like, "Yeah, like, how do you like it? Do you think you're going to be doing this?" I'm like, honestly, I go through phases all the time. This could be just a really strong phase where I really like this hobby, but then a year from now, it's going to be over. Thankfully, it's not over, and I really do like this, but it would suck to have bought all this equipment and be like, oh, all my trees are dying, or like I don't have time to take care of this, or I have different priorities in my life that changes. So I think the equipment piece of it, that's how I would look at it in terms of whether or not you want to
Yeah, and
definitely
there's
invest
probably
in it.
some pieces of equipment that are like lower cost and easier,
Yep.
lower barrier of entry, like less risk to purchase, right? Versus
Yep.
others, right? Maybe buying a $500 turntable is a bigger investment, or maybe for you, for example, maybe getting a new place to live with a large yard, like that's an example of, something that you might choose to do depending on
Yep.
your level of commitment to bonsai, right? And that's a personal thing of whether that's worth it or not, right? But
Your Redfin look listing we're looking for. It's like, how's the yard look? Is it south facing? How's the sun?
yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's a very very real struggle. I definitely relate to that. The other thing is that one other piece. So you were talking about, I think, proximal and distal. So
Yeah.
I think that's a really important point to make. And this is something that Ryan, whenever I was asking him about doing structural wiring, this was, I mean, he didn't say those words, but it was essentially, he was making that point of try to apply the pressure with your whole body, like from your shoulder, and not all like on your wrist, as well as like move your leverage point further out, right? So that you have
Yep.
to apply less overall force. And so I think
Yep.
that's the difference of, hey, whenever I'm trying to bend a heavy branch downwards, instead of like really choking up and like putting all the pressure on my wrist joint, I
Yep.
should move away, try to have a longer lever arm, I'll try to affect that joint from farther down the branch and then push with my body weight and like more of my joints essentially. So I think that's a really
Totally.
important thing for folks to think about.
I think it's just understanding. I mean, you don't have to be a physicist, but just to be able to understand the physics of it, right? And being able to leverage your entire self to be able to make it happen. Again, like not everyone is like this, 6+ foot tall, like jacked person doing bonsai. There's a lot of different body shapes doing it. And then I do think that they make it happen by just leveraging their body as best as possible at the right angles and using as many.
Yeah. Or like a bonsai jack for doing bends, for example, versus your body. So I think there's definitely tools out there. My MVP tool though, I recently started doing more work on shohin,
Mm-hmm.
and I just took some boards, whatever, cutting them up, screwing them together to make a platform that I
Yep.
can put the tree on so it's at my eye height. That
Yep.
was a game changer for me, both in terms of the comfort of the action as well as to some extent from an aesthetic perspective, you have to have the tree at viewing height to be able
Totally.
to set the pads correctly and things like that. So there's small
Yeah.
things like that that you might not necessarily think about but are ultra
No,
important.
that's a great point. And yeah, I think going back to just like my ergonomic thoughts, it's something that's above waist height and not really above eye height. If you're working in that kind of power zone, you're probably in your best. You have the most access to the most body components that you can use when it's getting lower below the belt. And if it's going above your head, then you're probably, again, you're just like, I don't know if you ever like installed shower curtains, right? This motion, and it's just like what, 20 rings, and you're like, why is my arms burning, right? So if
Yes,
you're
yes.
if you're not in the ergonomic right position, again, your body will tell you pretty quickly.
Okay, so that kind of like belly button to eyes is the sweet spot.
Yep.
Makes sense. Awesome. So I think one thing I think we should also keep in mind, or I'm curious on your thoughts on, are like you mentioned, there's a range of body types that do bonsai, and there's also a range of ages that do bonsai. I think that's something that we should just keep in mind as we're kind of going through questions as well. Is like, hey, like some people might be older, or some people might be younger, and they might have different considerations, and we should call that out because our listeners might be anywhere in that range.
Absolutely. Again, it's a profession that you're just getting into, and it's a entry point for everyone. Everyone, I think, appreciates when they see that's the best part of bonsai. Like when you see it, you're like, wow, that's amazing. That has no age limit to that. But when people get into it, I think that's where different people have different perspectives and different problems that they come across that they didn't know that they had to address, or they again didn't know the physicality that is required in.
Absolutely. So I want to dive into some practical tips as well. Like, what do you think are the top areas that someone might want to think about in terms of their body? Oh, their lower back, and then their wrist. What are the common problem areas for bonsai? And then maybe we can dive into some like specific exercises or things that people can do to either prevent injury or help strengthen themselves to
Sure,
increase their
totally.
kind of capacity.
I feel that the again, it's depending on where you come in into bonsai, right? The low back pain is either number one or number two, the most common diagnosis in the world that's non-lethal and that
Mm,
people suffer from. And despite it being one of the top diagnoses, everyone has a different opinion on how to treat or address low back pain. But again, something that people deal with. So the way I look at it, it may not be the right way to do it. It's just something that has worked for me and it worked for a lot of my patients. So it's just a general framework I like to give people. This back pain and kind of wrist, hand, elbow pain. So we'll probably should start with back pain first. The way I like to look at back pain, well, a little bit of background. I have a ton of back pain, or at least I had a ton of back pain in my 20s, and I went to a lot of PT, lots of chiropractic, just to try to figure it out. Nothing was really working, and unfortunately, it kind of led me to like being really inactive, and this kind of load capacity teeter totter that I was mentioning earlier really kind of applied. So I ended up losing a lot of capacity, and then I was kind of doing less things because I couldn't tolerate it. What's funny is that when I got into bonsai, being a part of the club, they're like, "Cool, young guy. Hey, we need you for we need you to come on our Yamadori collecting hunts because we need someone to help carry some things because we're also having our aches and pains." But little did they know, I also had a ton of back pain that I was like, I'm not so sure. Ironically, I use that as like my main motivation instead of just taking care of myself. It's like, okay, I want to go out with these guys. And so I started doing a lot more mobility and strengthening drills that I know I should be doing because I tell my patients to do this, but I really applied it to myself for a dedicated amount of time. And for the last 5 years, knock on wood, my back has been feeling great and I've been able to do a lot more. And I know that this is something I have to keep up for the rest of my life in order to do this a hobby and also everything else. But I think it's really funny. So with the back pain stuff, it's just kind of understanding what does the body need? What are we doing for most of the day? We are kind of hunched forward, right? Since I joke with my patients, like we have eyes in front of our head, so we're always going to be in this space here. So we're always naturally going to be inclined to be in what I call the shrimp position, which is not necessarily a bad thing, right? It's just, you're just here, right? And what the body craves is the opposite. So things like yoga becomes a really easy low entry access point for people to get into something that really opens them up. You think of things like downward dog, cobra position, even some of the trunk twisting things that they do. Those are some basic fundamental movements that almost everyone with back pain can benefit from, just because you're reversing some of the, I guess, overload of shrimp and needing the need of more extension, if that makes sense. I don't know, have you experienced that yourself?
Yeah, that's a very interesting one. I feel like I've had a very similar journey with pain as you in terms of having back pain in my 20s and then like taking some concrete steps. And I really relate to that. Like, hey, this is something you need to keep up for the rest of your life, but
Yeah.
it's worth it. But yeah, so you're saying that to combat this shrimp posture, which honestly in bonsai we end up doing a lot,
Yeah.
like an activity like yoga can help you reopen your body. What kind of frequency, like is it like, do I think of it as, oh, every day I do bonsai I need to do yoga, or is it more of like a, I should be incorporating yoga into my routine on a like my weekly routine, or how should folks think about that? Like is it like a one to one, like I do one bonsai I do one yoga, or I imagine maybe not, but
Yeah.
I'm curious like what is the right thought mental model to have around like doing more stretching, for example?
The mental model for me, it's the best exercise is the one that gets done. So you fit it to your schedule. If you can get it a certain practice in once or twice a week, that's certainly better than not, right? So, but I do think that the more time that you're dedicating to a certain task, certain activity, you would like to increase the kind of opposing opening activity. So things like yoga, if you can at least get twice a week, you probably will start to see differences in a way because you haven't done any of that kind of stretching or moving or opening yourself up in a way that you haven't done that in many years. I do think that it's one piece to it, and we'll talk a little bit more about that because of the capacity building. But in terms of yoga, for example, I like to tell my patients, if you can get 2 times a week, that's great. But again, motivation, this is the whole interest in human decision making and behaviors and habit setting, right? Not everyone's going to be able to have the time to do that. So I kind of just like tell them, if you can get it in for the week, make it happen. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
And then what I do follow up with them is that there needs to be some kind of strengthening component, right? I do think, for example, if you are working with trees, if you're a bonsai professional, you are doing physical labor all the time. So again, that's probably where you probably need more mobility activity to offset what you're doing. You're already doing the heavy lifting. You're doing the carries, you're doing the lunges, you're doing the squats. I think for general population who are not doing this for a living, having some kind of squatting, lunging routine can be really helpful. You probably have heard things about core being important for the low back. I think that's true. There's some caveats to that, but that's a whole different podcast. But for the most part, it is a good thing to have engaging and helping you out, especially with these heavier lifts. So a simple hack that I have people do, it's what I call a goblet position, where you're holding some kind of weight. Usually, like say something like right here, so they call it the goblet. You can hold a backpack full of books. Who doesn't have that? Or again, we have for some.
Shuhin bonsai.
Yeah, exactly. You can pick what you want, right? You're holding it close to your chest here, so you have essentially, this is the whole physics thing where you have a pull forward. So like your muscles have to really hold yourself up like this. That's where the core is engaging. And then you're doing like a squat or lunge with that. So we have a ton of pumice. We have 5-gallon buckets everywhere. Use that, right? Hug the 5-gallon bucket, hold the heavy object, and kind of do squats with that. I think that in combination with something like yoga or some kind of opening mobility activity, and again, there's a bunch of things out there that can help you out with this. You do that combination a couple of times a week, you're going to find yourself feeling more vital with your bonsai practice in general, and also just with daily chores and daily activities.
You're saying there's two like key, I guess, archetypes of actions that you might want to take. One is like a stretching, and so yoga might be an example of that, like opening your body back up from the shrimp position. And the other one is you need that strengthening component. So you need to do something that, I guess, in relation to your back, an exercise that might help is like that goblet squat or lunge.
Yeah.
But you have to also like do something to increase your capacity over time as well too.
Yeah, think of it as this, because sorry to interrupt, just like to piggyback on that point, is that you can stretch all you want and you can get flexible to these ranges, but when you go back to the activity that you want to do, so say it's bonsai, you go back into where you're strong, and you're strong in the shrimp position. So then if you're not able to strengthen yourself in these kind of places where you are able to access now, then the capacity is not there. So of course your body's going to find something that's more efficient, which is going to be the shrimp position, to be able to do those things. So that's why I think there's a good strengthening component that's going to be really important.
Makes sense. I imagine in your teeter-totter load versus capacity model, there's also some idea of if you're doing an action that's half of your capacity versus 95% of your capacity, like it might be a little bit safer to do that 50% capacity. And so if your capacity is higher, then thus like your things in your easy range, or I don't know how exactly to articulate that, but
Yeah, they just become less difficult and less of an injury risk. So.
Makes sense.
Yeah,
And
I mean
then,
that's for the back though, and so hand and wrist, same thing. And I made a little setup here so we can I want to pan the camera over to that. But
okay.
long and short of it, the hand and wrist problem is super common. I started trying to use copper this year, and it is so much harder, and I'm thankful for it because it's part of the growth. But yeah, it's just like understanding and respecting that some of these bends, you just, again, if you can't do the whole ergonomic thing, you also have to build the capacity in your forearms, wrists, and fingers. I think, as we alluded to earlier, it's one of the more common injuries that people are dealing with, especially what we call the pain here and the pain here. These are just like we're blessed with opposable thumbs, but we overuse them. And these
For
joints
folks
are
on the
just,
audio only, he was pointing to the base of his thumb and like where his thumb meets the palm of his hand. What are those? Maybe you can describe those areas better. But
yeah. So it's pretty much where you have your knuckles in your fist. It is the main first knuckle of your thumb, and then the subsequent joint that connects with your wrist. Those two locations are the most stressed out places for many people. It is, again, one of those most common things that people have complaints about and have arthritis in as we get older. So these are things that I feel that if you can do some of these activities I'm about to show you, that it could be really helpful.
awesome. Yeah, I would love to see those.
We got the hand cam. All right.
Yes.
So generally speaking, actually, ironically, I played basketball this morning and injured my hand. So this is going to be a good case study. For the most part, what I do like to help people out is that there is a certain mobilization. This is going to be more complex than it needs to be, but let me help explain. So long and short of it, you have your radius bone here, the bone, and you have your ulna bone. These are the two bones that comprise your forearm. What they do is when you're turning your wrist over like this is called pronation. The radius is kind of swirling around the ulna. So the radius is this one, it's swirling over. Anyways, a lot of people who have wrist pain, think about when you're kind of gripping anything like this, you're using pliers, you're trying to get wire to turn. It's a lot of pronation. They have a lot of limitations over here. One of my favorite mobility drills to do with people is that they find a really sore spot. So think of, again, the thumb side coming all the way up here. This is the radial head. There's going to be some tenderness in this area. And then you try to turn over. And then what this does, it hurts quite a bit. And the idea is that this is mobilizing this ability for the radius to roll over the ulna. And that leads to less wrist strain, less wrist pain, particularly right in this kind of like line. It helps out a ton. So again, I have this cool pointer thing here. So it's going to be right here.
Okay, so this is very interesting.
Yep.
To kind of summarize and make sure I'm understanding.
Sure.
So you're saying that pain in the kind of bridge of the wrist, like kind of that skinniest point on your wrist,
Yep.
a lot of times originates from your kind of where your elbow is, like the tendons that go all the way up to your elbow.
Exactly, because
Okay.
this is the whole efficiency thing, right? If you don't have the range of motion up here to rotate your forearm all the way, right, to be able to grip something, then that lack of, like, say, 5 degrees gets more demand here. So then you're straining here a little bit more. So a lot of my
Fascinating.
patients, when you get this to open up, they're like, wow, that's magic. I mean, they don't like me when I'm kind of working on them there because it's very sore. But you're able to do this, like, again, like I would
Okay,
do
so
this.
the exercise is keep pressure on that specific, like where that joint kind of connects in your elbow, and
Yep.
then do the twist.
Yep. So you kind of
Okay.
rotate over
And
while
that like
pressing.
kind of stretches it or like gives you more mobility there, which it's
Yes.
not necessarily strengthening it. It's like almost stretching it or like allowing it to have more mobility so that you put less pressure farther down your wrist.
Exactly. So the
Okay,
way I like to
wow.
look at things is going to be one, mobility, two, strength. So what can we do to mobilize things? And then once they're mobilized, strengthen. Same thing with like the yoga. How can we mobilize with yoga and then strengthen with some kind of squatting goblet activity?
Okay.
Cool.
Okay, so
So
this is
that
the mobilization
piece. Yep.
piece. Okay, wow, this is really fascinating. This is actually exactly my issue. So it's kind of funny that you're explaining that because I'm like, that makes a lot of sense now. This is very
It's
helpful.
super common, and again, it's just like it's really humbling where you're pushing it. Like, I didn't know I could hurt here. It's and there's these different parts of the body that does that. Um, so to piggyback on that, just sticking with the forearm because we have that here. This is one of my favorite techniques I like to teach. Generally speaking, you have muscles that start from here and they run all the way down this way. This is going to be kind of your flexor muscles, so things that kind of bring your wrist into this position, right?
Yep.
And then on the backside, from the
If
elbow,
you
a little
don't
bit
mind
above the.
explaining, because I'm not well, I'll try to release with video, but some platforms might be audio only. So if you
Sure.
don't mind, like as you're pointing, like just say like, oh, like this. I mean, you won't be able to explain it exactly, but yeah, like
No, I
near
totally
your
got you.
elbow. Okay.
Totally. So think of like your palm is facing the ceiling, right? So when your palm is facing the ceiling, your forearm is facing the ceiling. Most of the muscles that bend your wrist forward, like your palm towards your face, that's going to be your flexor muscles. So they kind of sit on the underside of your forearm. On the backside of the forearm are going to be your extensors. So when you flip over your wrist and your palm is now facing the ground, you have these muscles here that run along pretty much above the elbow and down the elbow that are going to be your wrist extensors. So it kind of pulls up your knuckles to your face. So these are the two muscle groups that you need to know. The exact ones are not that important. So the technique I'm going to be showing you is something that's pulled from like Chinese medicine. It's a really easy thing to do on your own. All you really need is a spoon and some kind of cream. So this is Costco. This is a way to mobilize the tissue or to relax the tissue in the area. The technique is called gua sha. It's something that people use. I mean, in Chinese medicine, they would scrape to a certain point where you would bleed. So when you bleed out all the toxins and the bad things in the area. The best part is that the research has shown that you don't need to bleed. You can just get the area a little bit red. You can get the same kind of benefit from this technique without the bloodletting piece. So if you get a little bit of lotion here, spread there, you're going to angle the handle of the spoon at a 45-degree angle facing away from you. And you're just going to go along the muscle there. This, you will probably feel different, like kind of almost like sandpaper grittiness on certain muscles that maybe hurt a little bit more. But this is a really simple way of calming down these forearm muscles. And for a lot of people who have like really blown up forearm muscles from, again, like working a lot with wire one day, lots of lots of hand like bending of branches, you're able to kind of help relax this area. And you can see it's getting red a little bit, but you do this for 5-10 minutes, it starts. Again, you don't need to do that. So you do this, you push away from you. And then again, the thing is that it's sitting at like a 45-degree angle. I don't know. So same thing with the back. And then you put the cream there and you're able to kind of, again, scrape down. And that just leads to a lot of tension release with all the things that are wrist involved. So this helps a ton with wrist pain, helps with a ton with hand pain as well. So
Wow.
do that 2-3 minutes. It's a really easy way to do it on your own. You don't need, I mean, you can buy a special tool that probably costs $20-$30 that just more ergonomically sits in your hand. But for the most part, for self-care, if you have some kind of spoon or fork or whatever handle, I wouldn't use a knife. But that way you can kind of help release this tissue, and then it just feels great because everything feels more flexible. And even though like I injured myself earlier today here, it just feels like less tension there already just because these muscles are less. Does that make sense?
Wow, yeah, that's amazing. I feel like it's very well, for someone who doesn't know how the body works, I guess it's very non-intuitive that I have this pain in my wrist, but the cause is actually my forearm. And so that wouldn't be something I think that somebody would naturally know to do. So that's really, really helpful.
Yeah, and it's just like a little piece. Again, it's understanding how your body is connected in so many ways. It's really helpful. So that's the gua sha, or the instrument soft tissue mobilization technique that they label it as. But I just taught you something that you can do super cheap, which I guess your physical therapist probably wouldn't want you to know, but it's okay. Okay, and then so that's just with the forearm stuff, and we're still in the kind of mobilization realm. What I like in terms of like kind of like thumb pain. So what you need to know is that there's a muscle. This muscle here is kind of like the crux of everything. Oh, that's really tender. This is the crux of everything for a lot of the stabilization of this joint and this joint. So the two joints that we talked about earlier in the thumb, the one that's like the knuckle of the thumb and the one that's the base of the wrist connected to your thumb. The web space between your index finger and the thumb are the places where the muscles kind of can be most tender. What I like to do with like a simple like office clip, if this happens to be a really painful day, you can put just pressure there and it's just really relieving. So think of like an acupressure point or like a trigger point technique. Instead of overusing your opposite thumb to use that pressure, using like a little office clip there for a couple minutes at a time seems to cause a lot of relaxation with pain at the two joints of the thumb that I mentioned earlier. So that can be something super helpful. So this office clip is one of those bigger ones that you would use for like bigger stacks of paper, and just bang, you can stick it there. And then I just sit it there, especially if it's been a tough day.
You mentioned that you have this injury. What like roughly would be wrong? Like, have you torn something, or is it just inflamed, or is there like some?
I would say in the context of today, since I was playing basketball earlier, it's more from trauma. So it's just definitely a bruised area. But then the muscles and stuff are a little bit more tense. But
and obviously it can be different for different folks. But whatever,
I would say most people will have some kind of overuse strain of the muscle here. So then that can lead to the similar pain.
Okay.
What I was going to say earlier is like, with all the PT advice that I have, it doesn't really hurt to go see. I mean, every provider's different, right? And they have different expertise. They have different opinions on certain things. But at the very least, if you are concerned about an injury, definitely go see your local physical therapist to rule out some of the scarier things. Is it a big tear? Is it like like your arthritis is getting to a point where you can't manage it, right? Having a professional take a look at it first can be really helpful. How you manage it afterwards, some of these techniques can be really helpful and could be even maybe more helpful than what the local person knows. So it's still good to get it checked though.
Yeah, absolutely. I've had really good experience with physical therapy, so definitely recommend folks.
Right. Okay, so strengthening. You might have done these ones before in PT, but I would say my favorite ones. Let's go back to the forearm. So here's a hammer. Okay, so you want to hold the hammer in this position. Okay, this is not the best video, but we'll work with it.
So you're holding the hammer kind of face up with the heavy, the mallet at the top.
Yep. So the further you are, of course, from the heavy piece, the more difficult this becomes. So you can start halfway. And the idea is that you're going to keep your elbow tucked into your side. And you're going to rotate this all the way into that pronation position. Right? So what this does, it really gets this muscle to strengthen. And then you're going to slowly bring it up all the way to the opposite side. And now you're getting the flexor muscles to strengthen. What I like to do with this hammer, I literally just bought this for this purpose because living in an apartment, I don't have much home improvement stuff to do. But it's a great way of strengthening up your forearm muscles without like anything ballistic, nothing too quick. It's a great way just to get that stimulus in. So it's a great way to strengthen up that area. Also, in the same way, I'm going to do a side view. You can do something like here. We're going to go down, back up, This might be a little bit more provocative, but this helps out a lot of the muscles along this route. So, hammer. I call this the beer drinking muscle.
Lifting the
But that can
sign.
be really
Yeah.
helpful to get those muscles to get stronger and to fortify your wrist and thumb. I like using the hammer, or people will use like a Swiffer because it's a long lever. And you can find different ways to kind of get that pronation, supination activities going.
I have done that one before. Instead of the hammer is actually very interesting. That seems like a very good approach. I was using a exercise band.
Yep.
Those weighted ones, holding it under my foot and then doing those kind of like pronations.
Yeah, so that can work. It's just that even if you had like a dowel or like a stick or a broom, right? I feel like that using the long lever can get you to have a little bit more of that nuanced rotation stimulus into the area versus the band, which is very just like unilateral.
Very
or
unidirectional. Yeah, that makes sense. That makes a ton of sense.
Okay, so that's for the forearm. That's my favorite one. And then for fingers, right? I use a ball just for reference, but you want your strongest grip is with like a tennis ball grip. This is where your fingers are in like if we're talking about ergonomics, that's better. All right, so this is your most ergonomic position, right? So if we want to strengthen up this muscle, I use the ball as a reference. You pick up this finger and you try to turn it in. It's very subtle. I have no idea how to explain this to someone, but if you had the claw position and you're just bringing your index finger towards your thumb,
yeah.
that becomes a way to kind of start strengthening that muscle.
Oh,
or
wow.
to get
Okay.
some
So yeah,
activity there.
kind of act like you've got a ball in your hand with your kind of four fingers up and then your thumb to the side, and then move your index finger kind of laterally towards your thumb, and you can really feel like a very specific muscle
muscle work.
activated in between like in that web between your thumb and your index finger.
Exactly. And then once you kind of graduate from the what we call isotonic, so the active range of motion of it, you can apply pressure onto it. So when you're pushing, you're getting a resistance through this hand. So pushing into it, you're getting resistance. You're pushing into it.
You're pushing it away from your thumb, like towards your other fingers.
Yep. So
you're applying the pressure.
The cue I like to say is like, don't let me move you. So say this is my left hand. I'm pushing down, and it's like, don't let me move you. You can see that this muscle is engaging.
Yeah.
Okay. So I like that a lot. The other ones that I do like to do too is going to be holding here, same principle. Again, this to like this grip, tennis ball grip, and you're pushing out this way.
You're pushing your thumb outwards from the tennis ball grip.
It's like a similar motion to bringing your thumb to your pinky.
Yep.
Right? That, but then you're resisting it from doing it. So you're able to kind of get some muscular tension there.
Makes sense.
Okay. And the last one I like is just like the thumb going up this way. But so this is the side view. You're going to bring your thumb up to like a thumbs up position. But you're going to resist the thumbs up. You can just feel certain muscles and you can see the tendon kind of pulling or getting more engaged there. So generally speaking, if I were to give a rep and set scheme for just anyone starting this, I would say you can do like 20 repetitions of each of these motions. So the index wiggle, then you have the thumb to pinky wiggle, and then you have the thumbs up. You do that 20 times, and then you do each of those resisted for 10-second holds 10 times. Just a really good way to kind of get those muscles engaged. 10-second
so one set of 20 reps unresisted, and then one set of 20 reps, or then one set of hold for 10 seconds.
Yep, 10 of 10. So 10-second hold, 10-second, 10 repetitions.
Then resisted, 10-second hold, 10 reps. Okay.
Yeah, this is a shout out
helpful.
to Sam. Sam wanted something for this joint, and I was like, I'm gonna deliver this to Addison.
This is bonsai specific knowledge. And then is somebody doing that daily, or I mean, I guess this comes back to the earlier point of whatever you're going to end up doing, but
preferably is daily. But yeah, it's better than not doing it. I think it can be just really helpful. And then generally when you move those muscles, the way that this muscle, the muscle in your web space, the muscle and the meat of your thumb, they're just really good at stabilizing these joints, and having that engaged can only help you out.
In relation to general fitness, are there any exercises that you do that would kind of incidentally strengthen those areas? I guess, does doing deadlifts and gripping a heavy bar, or are there things that indirectly strengthen these areas as well, or is the best option to try to directly strengthen them?
Naturally, if you're able to have a bar that is the right size, right? So I prefer kettlebells. That's my form of choice. Doesn't mean that you have to. But generally speaking, the wider the grip, so again, think tennis ball grip, right? Anything that requires you to do that and lift heavy things is going to be helpful. Yes,
Okay.
deadlift can help out significantly, but to have someone who just retired get into deadlifts, maybe not the first thing they're going to do at the gym. But even just like doing loaded carries, like think of like bringing in the groceries in, loaded carries with dumbbells. You're able to kind of hold at your side and just kind of walking around the gym or walking around your home or outside. That can be really helpful. So if you had, for example, again, 5-gallon buckets, because we all do, and you have pumice or lava in it, find a way to get the grip a little bit bigger, but then that can be a wonderful way of strengthening up your grip
Yeah,
strength.
like wrap
And
a
these
little
just,
pool noodle around it or something like
yeah,
that. And cut it in half.
exactly,
And yeah,
exactly.
interesting. Very cool.
Cool.
Those exercises were ultra helpful. I think
Mhm.
that'll be a boon to the bonsai community. One thing I want to check with you though is we talked about those in the preventative context, but what do you do if you are injured? Or maybe
Yeah.
you get into bonsai and you already have some sort of disability or physical challenge.
Like we said earlier, there's many different walks of life that come to the same profession, same hobby, and you'll carry your own injuries that you've dealt with in your whole lifetime. Honestly, when in doubt, you go to medicine, get it checked out, make sure that all the obvious scary things are addressed for. So from tears to profound arthritis, these are just some things that exercises and self mobility stuff can't really change. As an advocate for physical therapy, just because we have so much time with you and be able to assess you, and we're kind of the movement experts, it's worth having that an assessment if you have an injury because you just don't know what you don't know. Generally speaking, from a PT standpoint, it's a. I mean, one of my mentors told me it's a. I don't know if I can cuss. But if I can't cuss, it's okay.
You guys.
It's calm stuff down and then build it back up, right? Build calm stuff down, build stuff up. It's as simple as that. So kind of what I just showed you with the exercises is finding ways to mobilize the joint, the tissue, whatever is the kind of problem or one of the main problems that's causing your pain. You mobilize it, find ways to calm it down, and then using the same kind of load capacity principle, find ways to build the capacity up. Having a physical therapist or any kind of other movement provider to be able to see you and provide that kind of curated individual program, I think that can be really helpful.
Makes sense. Awesome. One thing I wanted to chat about too was I think pain can be very debilitating and the inability to do an action. Let's say you injure your wrist and then you suddenly are starting to lose progress on your bonsai practice or aren't able to keep up with your trees during that period. I think can be very like mentally challenging. So I imagine there's a strong mental component to physical therapy as well. And I'm curious kind of your general guidance or how you think people should approach injury.
Right, that's the therapy portion of physical therapy, right? Pain, it depends on the person, right? It depends how they view their challenges and how they look at pain. There's going to be certain people that kind of brush it off and they kind of continue doing their thing. And there's other people whose life completely comes to a stop because of pain. And just understanding that people come from different walks of life and you have to meet them at where they're at. That's my main thing every day in the clinic. Understanding pain, and I alluded to this earlier, pain as a protector, then you're able to kind of appraise if the activity you're doing is safe or not. So if you're thinking about, oh, I get pain when I do certain activities, say lifting a pot, right? They go straight to my back. Can you make adjustments to make that happen? Or is this pain really telling you that there's something seriously wrong down there in my back? And that's again when you go to a professional to rule those things out. But for many people, they'll have profound low back pain and then they go to the MRI. The MRI says, hey, it looks great. Your back looks great. But then, doctor, why do I feel so bad? Right? Is this when you can assure yourself that you've done everything to make sure that nothing is broken, nothing is torn, or if there are changes there, you're cleared to still work on it. And it's through that understanding that's where you can engage in mobility and capacity building activities to be able to tolerate those movements. What's really hard for everyone to hear is that pain is just something that we're all going to experience. And we all experience different varied levels of it. And asking that question, is this safe for me? Is this activity is safe? Helps you kind of appraise further whether or not you should be doing an activity. Not just that all pain is bad and we can't do it. When you are, for people who like to go to the gym, they purposely micro tear their muscles and they hurt and they're like convinced that this is great. This is a great feeling. right? So they're able to kind of dial in certain types of pains and be able to understand, oh, that's going to be okay for me. This is part of the process. This is how I get better. There's other types of pain that people experience, neuropathic, deep joint pain, inflammatory pain, where it's very unfamiliar. And you're like, this can't be good. Like, this is not a muscle getting stronger thing. There's like something inherently wrong at the bone level of what I'm dealing with. That's where you need to go see a professional to help appraise whether or not it is a safe or not safe activity to do. And then if you are cleared to do it safely, that's where you have to kind of overcome some of that pain experience that you're having and know that it's going to be part of the process as your body is trying to protect you as much as possible. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, that's really helpful to hear.
It's really tough to wrap anyone's head around it. It's because I've been there. I've been on the floor and had to like sleep on the floor for 3 days because my back says, quite frankly, you're not ready to stand up straight. And yeah, you can get an X-ray and everything, and it looks like, oh, you have a back of a 20-year-old. Like, fine. Why is my body protecting me so much? That was the big question. And once I was able to kind of get out of the flare-up stage, slowly start moving again, and then start adding again like loaded activities to it with different motivations, right? External motivation of going Yamadori collecting, which I still haven't gone yet. But that's again, those are the things where you are able to kind of motivate yourself, but also understand that you're not damaged.
I think it's a really powerful journey from like being in this really low debilitated place and finding a way to move to a better, a better position over time. And I guess the unfortunate part of it or the challenge is that it takes a lot of work. Targeted, intelligent work of the mobilization and the strengthening that you mentioned. And then I think also general fitness component. And so there are lifestyle changes that you might need to make, but there is a brighter future down the line if you can make those changes.
I mean, the mental portion, it's all connected, right? Because there's many times where you can think of something and you feel, right? So it is completely like an anticipated response, right? The story I like to tell people is that say this person is walking down a pathway to get to their friend's house, and it's like a grassy pathway, so you can't really see what's on your feet. Something next to their leg, and they're like, oh, that's kind of weird, and they keep on walking. But then 2 hours later, they wake up and they're like, oh, I'm in the hospital. Apparently, I got bit by a snake, and yeah, I almost lost my life, but thankfully, I went to the hospital and I'm okay. So the next, week when they have to walk the same path, they're going to walk the same steps and feel something on their leg. The first thing the body's going to do is anticipate that it's probably a snake bite, right? So that reinforcement, that's the psych portion of it, where you can look down. It's like, actually, it was just actually a twig. But the way that the body anticipates and actually pretty much curates pain, then that's how you're understanding that there's a psychological component to it. So pain is definitely physical, it's definitely mental, and there's certain positions that even for me, like when I lift a certain way, I'm like, ooh, that was not a good idea. And just kind of sitting there is like, okay, did I start a fire or not? Thankfully, I didn't. But again, it's hard to completely erase that from my anticipations.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think you've given us a good kind of framework for starting to have a better relationship with that pain and then feel some hope of like with these intelligent actions, we can also improve and strengthen ourselves over time.
Totally.
Awesome. So this has been amazingly helpful for me and I think hopefully for everyone. So thank you so much for taking your time. If a dedicated practitioner, someone who wants to do bonsai for the rest of their life, listens to this today, what are 2 or 3 habits or key takeaways you think they should have to enable them to be really sustainable in this practice?
I'm not telling everyone to become a gym bro after listening to this. It sounds like that, but it's not. Because not everyone's meant to like go to the gym. It's like it can be a toxic place, etc. Right? But ironically, I think as with any hobby, but with this particular hobby, we're so invested on learning the little tidbits and hacks and everything for our trees. And then we are finding all these different ways to take care of our trees on a daily basis, all these small little activities to make them as robust and healthy as possible, either for the next repotting, for the next wiring, the next styling, whatever, right? It's all about health. It's all about energy and keeping them in the best energy positive state. What we don't do is do that for ourselves. And I feel that that's just a natural thing that we take a lot of things for granted. And I think starting early is always better, but it's never too late to start. But you do the main basics. This is something that's not new, but you make sure that you are sleeping well, making sure that you are exercising a couple of times a week or doing some kind of physical activity a couple of times a week. And you make sure that you're fueling yourself appropriately in all those realms. And that's something that's just like a blanket statement for all people to live better or to have better longevity. The way I look at it is that a lot of people get into bonsai and then they realize that, oh, this is going to take a while. This stick in a pot, if I do everything right for the next 10, 15 years, this could be something pretty cool. It's something that I'm really proud of. And the reality is that that future self has to be in a healthy state to be able to take care of it too. So if you're looking out for your future self and doing all these small little activities from the sleep, nutrition, exercise standpoint, you're going to be physically, but also mentally in a better place to be able to be there when it does happen. I think that's just one of the most important things. But if you were talking just about actionable steps from today that you could do, is just get curious about mobility. I think good habits snowball. And if you're able to do like, say you learn like, oh, I can do this kind of like little scraping thing on my forearm a couple of times a week, that can lead to, I'm more curious about what exercise I can do. I can be more curious, like, hey, maybe I should. You said something about sleep. It just it snowballs into better habits that just leads to better activities. So if you can find a mobility practice, this is where I think yoga becomes that entry point for a lot of people, because you just put out a YouTube video, you're like, gonna try it. Cool, that was 5-10 minutes for the day. It doesn't take too much time for people who spend too much time on social media like myself. Is like, just take that time and put that into mobility. You're probably going to be investing in your future self in a way that is better than most index funds out there, right? So, and the thing is, if you are able to establish a mobility practice, say that, well, for example, for me, my primary goals for myself is to help my hip mobility, help my mid-back mobility, and help my neck mobility. These three things I try to hit a couple of times a week. I feel so much better when I do that, so that I know that I'm setting myself up for success for next week, next month, next year, and then many years ahead. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, I love that. I think your point around we spend all this time hyper focusing on these micro adjustments for bonsai to set the tree up for future success. But if we're not there to be able to catch that next action in the future because of our own health, then we're not doing bonsai correctly, or we're not like putting our all into bonsai, right? If we're not also taking care of ourselves. I think that's a very profound kind of point.
It's a good point. And like the main question that got me into bonsai, it's like some video of Ryan again. So I'm a fan of Ryan. And again, everyone has their professional that they like. But it's just like, can you do bonsai well, or can you do bonsai correctly? And there's again, it's an open forum for that. But in terms of taking care of yourself, there's definitely some certain principles that you can start today to take care of yourself much better than you're currently doing before. And once you have this kind of wider lens of, knowing that this is going to take time, knowing that your self-care is going to take time, then you're kind of open to a lot more activities or a lot more options than you were close to.
Makes a ton of sense. Yeah, so I think for everyone listening, highlighting the point of, start your mobility practice now and have that as a continued growth point alongside your trees as you're getting more experience with bonsai is like the single most important thing that you can kind of do today. I know this has definitely changed my trajectory in bonsai. I feel like this is going to be a turning point for me in terms of my longevity in the hobby. So I really appreciate you taking the time, Justin, and I'm looking forward to growing together with you on this journey we're in within bonsai.
Totally. No, I appreciate you just taking the time to give me a platform to talk about this stuff, because it's very niche. I mean, it shouldn't be niche, but it's pretty niche. And I think there are just hopefully some things from today that help someone out in terms of their self-care. And at the very least, it gets them to see a professional, a provider that can help them out where they didn't know that was accessible. But I just think it's awesome that you're doing this, and I just appreciate the opportunity.